Welcome to the Nathaniel McGuire Show, where we overcome our fear and live our purpose. Welcome to the Nathaniel McGuire Show, where we overcome fear and live our purpose. Today we're going to continue to talk about ordinary people that do extraordinary things. So make sure to continue with us on this journey. Today I have an extraordinary guest with me. One of the things that I'm really involved in is mental health. So today you guys are going to get a treat just talking about trauma and some of the things that people go through. So without further ado, I want to introduce Joe Standing. How are you doing today? I'm doing well, Joe. So I was introduced to you at Harvard at a mastermind symposium, and it was extraordinary, some of the things that you shared and that you've gone through. But first, I just want to start out with, what do you do? Tell us some of the things that you do.
So, many different ways to express what I do. But really, the fundamental work that I do is to facilitate healing within survivors of trauma, mostly rape and war survivors, mostly those two categories.
So this is what is amazing to me, that Joe helps actually with veterans and people that are in the military. You would never think somebody so small, sweet, and petite helps people that have been in the military, but she does. And she helps people to overcome trauma, people that have gone through severe trauma. Most of us don't even understand what trauma is and that we've experienced it. So one of the things I want to talk about is, Joe, can you help us understand just kind of what is trauma? What does it look like?
So trauma, basically, so I don't do the dictionary one because I think that the dictionary is very limiting and it's very victimizing when we look up the word trauma in the dictionary. For me, I like to look at it as the physiological changes that occur in the mind, body, being of a person, because when we look at what trauma is in a total sense, we really have the opportunity to gain mastery of ourselves, and it's a part of our story, it being whatever the trauma is, versus an all-defining rest of your life complacent experience.
So this is what's powerful because, in my work, I'm constantly dealing with people that have trauma, and it's funny, all the different definitions, and one of the things that they will describe as having a flashback. Where people will think they're dealing with something, but really they're not dealing with that. So one of the definitions I give is you have somebody and they've been maybe in war or something, there's bombs going off, and they know the fight, flight, or be paralyzed, and then they come home and the car backfires. And when a car backfires sometimes and they come home from that situation, what kind of happens to people when they've been in an intense situation where there's violence? And then they come home and just hear a loud noise? Like, what are some of the things that can happen?
Exactly how you kind of described, Nathan, is there's that echo effect. There's that experiencing of a moment that's no longer present. And I think that in society, a note about that is that we're not really schooled in how to handle and manage real life emotions. Things that actually take place internally, and make them accessible and something that's spoken about in an okay way in society. So I think that moment of being triggered is what it is. It's a trigger.
So this is the messed up thing. You guys are probably hearing this, and we're getting into psychoanalytic and counseling things, and so we're about to break it down and make it real simple. Joe, people don't understand that trauma looks like this. You're dating a boy, he cheated on you, he was on his cell phone. You date a new boy, the new boy goes on the cell phone, and you start getting mad, talking about, what you doing? I know what you're doing. You're cheating on me. And the boy is just talking to his mama. But because you experienced that trauma before, now you're having a flashback and you think that something is happening that is not happening. So, Joe, tell us, how did you even get involved in this work and helping people overcome some of these things?
Well, when I was in New York, I was let's go a little bit, a couple months before that. I spent the first 17 years of my life in Virginia Beach, relatively small beach town. And then I basically became completely obsessed with the notion that I was going to go to New York and I was going to, just be an actress and basically be able to like support my whole family was my dream. And I took on a lot of responsibility in that anyway, but we won't go too down that path. But basically, when I was in New York City, my experience was that I ended up working at a mafioso-owned restaurant. And being a small town Virginia girl, I didn't even realize that the mafia was real. I thought The Godfather was a movie. And so I only learned that I was working with the mafia in a very above the board way at a restaurant when I experienced being kidnapped and raped by one of the mafioso restaurant partners. So they're a very affluent group, obviously. I mean, it's organized crime, and yes, they are very affluent. So I think the terror for me was not being able to tell anyone, and then when I did, having sort of that hanging over my head, like, well, if you go and tell anyone else, you don't know what's going to happen to you.
So this is why you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, because I bet you none of you could ever realize that this young lady went through that experience. And so she went through something that tragic, which, in the work that we do, people can experience things like that and it overtakes them. It depresses them. They are filled with anxiety. They can never go out and do anything again. But one of my favorite things when I do this work is hearing a story like Joe, because Joe has turned this tragedy into a platform and now helps people. So that's what's so extraordinary. And her story must get out so people can understand that they can go through something like this. And Joe has actually become a healer. So after going through all that, this young lady now has learned how to help people heal from that. So I want you to tell us a little bit of how you do that, where do we go to find this out, and kind of take me through that process.
Well, thank you for saying all the things that you just said. And I want everyone to be really clear that depression and anxiety are definitely trademark cards of the experience of any big life event like that. And I definitely experienced, and sometimes I might re-experience it. It's just that I now know through great self-acceptance and practice and honing into myself instead of disconnecting, that I can work through it in a much shorter time frame. So in the beginning, after that event that occurred when I was 17, I would disconnect sometimes for months at end. I'd just fall into depression for sure. And then the more modalities of healing that I learned from all of the amazing teachers from around the planet, and including authors, some of them I haven't met in person, and yet the ones that I worked with in person and vicariously through the work that they've offered, like Louise Hay. She has an amazing story, and she's been around so long, and yet no one really knows what started that, her empire of having, Johannesburg and Sydney and New York and London offices. So but that's what I really want to say, is that it certainly was a collection of people that encouraged me. And then really the thing is that we can talk about what to do until the cows come home. Yeah. But until each of us individually want to work on the staples of our lives, whatever we choose them to be. And that, one more thing about that is whatever we choose those to be, notice that I say that, because I think, okay, so there's a statistic, and I don't think I know, and I cannot say the source at the moment because it's totally left my mind, but there is a source basically that says that people who live traditional lifestyles after a major life trauma are more likely, exponentially more likely, to spiral into PTSD. People who live modern day lifestyles marked by figuring out what our staples are individually, what matters to us, and being courageous enough to say, I'm living that despite what friends or relatives or community members or even your own guru or mentor might say in response to that. So I think being a survivor of trauma is a really cleansing experience that we sometimes overlook. That it's not all doom and gloom. It's not black and white. There's a whole field, just like Rumi says, right? There's a whole field between, black and white, right and wrong, and I'll meet you there, sort of a thing. So I think number one thing is the willingness to show up and do the work and be willing to disagree with people, and only be with a teacher or a mentor who you can respect if you disagree, and if you disagree, that they can still respect you.
So one of the most important things that I've heard and hear you say is the importance of finding someone to help you, finding the type of person that you feel comfortable with.
Yeah.
Do you think you can overcome something like this by yourself?
Absolutely not. I mean, we just live in a shadow. If we're by ourselves, there's no dynamism and perspective, and we need to know but not be attached to other people's opinions and perceptions of what our path needs to look like in healing. I know I heard from my mother growing up, you need to find a rich man and get married. And it's funny, Cher does an interview, the singer Cher, now iconic, been years ago, still she has a presence in our world. She says, that her mother actually said the same thing. I saw an interview and she says, "Mom, I am a rich man."
I saw that. That was a pimp move right there.
Yeah.
I am the rich man.
So the thing is, I, like some of the other people that I've seen on your shows, like the woman Angel, who did the clothing boutique and just rose to heights out of nothing. I came in, it's funny, there's a commonality there. I moved to New York City with $400 in my pocket. So it was urgent that I find the first job, and that God had me find this Italian mafioso place. And we never are given cards that we can't handle. So
I had no idea the power of sitting up here on this couch, that a person can go through such trauma, not just overcome it, but then teach others how to heal. And I guess I also want to ask you, before we get to, that she's written a book, she's done some other things, but I just want the audience to hear, when somebody goes through something like this, what do you think is different? What was on the inside of you that made you find someone to talk to? Like what's on the inside of you that made you push and overcome and do what it is that you needed to do to heal and to just help others?
Well, in the beginning, I didn't want to tell anyone once I was shut down by that one person I entrusted. So I wouldn't, for me, it took a long time to have open conversations. And once I started to initiate them with women and men who I met and continue to meet, because tell my story, they tell theirs. And it's astounding how many men and women have experienced things that aren't spoken about, and how it affects their lives because it's not being talked about.
There's one of my favorite texts that just kind of coins why I do this. We overcome him by the blood of the Lamb and the word of our testimony. It means that we overcome people not just by using the so-called name of faith or God or Jesus, but telling people our story. It's our story that helps people overcome. Because if I can hear that you can make it and you made it and went through this, then it makes me believe then maybe I can do it. So, Joe, you're awesome, extraordinary.
Thanks, Nate.
I also want to, let me see if I say, well, I want to make sure that people go get this book, Conquer Trauma Drama. How can they go and get this book? What website? Tell us.
Yeah, you can just go to joestanding.com, J-O, standing like you're standing up, joestanding.com.
It's one thing to hear her story. It's another thing to read the words and find out in detail how she overcame some of the things that she went through. So please, and also I would tell you to buy this book and give it to other people that you know are going through some things. So make sure to get this book to find out how to really overcome and live your dream. And Joe, thank you for coming on today.
Thank you so much. It's a real honor.